Tonight I'm pleased to present Colin Winnett, who will read from and talk about his new book, The Job of the Wasp. Author Patrick DeWitt says, "The Job of the Wasp is wonderfully creepy and peculiar, a sort of gothic rendition of Lord of the Flies." And Kelly Link calls it a witty and grisly gothic, unlike anything she's ever read. Winnett is the author of Haint Stay, Coyote, Fondly, Animal Collection, and Revelation. His writing has appeared in The Believer, Los Angeles Review of Books, Lucky Peach, and Playboy. He lives in San Francisco. We're very happy to have him here tonight. Please welcome Colin Winnett.
Took me a little longer than I thought to get up here. I should have jogged it, you know. It's very weird when you put out a book. So I put out this book. It's called The Job of the Wasp, and I've been out touring with it. But it's very strange when you put out a book and reviews start coming in and blurbs start coming in, and they're all just like, "What a creepy little weirdo. It's such a creepy, weird thing that you did. It's so gross." It's like, it's just like, oh yeah, it's meant as a compliment, so I'll take it. But you learn a lot about yourself when you write these things. So yeah, I mean, The Job of the Wasp, I've been referring to it as a tender murder mystery. Yeah, how about that? We'll just try that out. I haven't really been doing that often. I just thought I would give it a try.
This is your first
tonight.
try.
Yeah. It went over all right. I got it's sort of a gothic potential ghost story set in a boys' orphanage. And so I did the book with Soft Skull Press, who's a fantastic press, and after they accepted it, I had a few months to work on it, and I sent it back to my editor, and within 2 days or something, she wrote me an email that was like, "Before we get started, I just want to point out the overabundance of the following words. Pervert and murder." And I was like, intentional. We don't touch either of those words, I need them. So I thought I would start by reading a short scene where one of those words appears for the first time. So I find it. I used to have these really adorable little cat tabs. They were black cats because it's a scary book. But then I accidentally sold my reading copy to someone on the road. So that's gone. Now I just have dead air instead. But more about the cat tabs. They were very long, but had a limited amount of adhesive. So it's just they're actually pretty worthless, but still adorable. The adhesive was made up this much, 10% of the cat. In the morning, I was called to the headmaster's office. A small man in suspenders and a striped white shirt was there, and I was made to stand on a stool. He brought up my arms and spread my legs, and gripped each and every part of me, grumbling to himself. The headmaster was at his desk, drawing on 2 halves of a torn sheet of paper. When he was finished, he placed 1 half in a drawer by his right knee and crumpled the other half in his left hand. He held the crumpled paper in a fist, which he gently pulsed as he watched the small man grip me. "You're fatter than boys your height should be," said the small man. "I'm sorry," I said. "I thought you were an orphan," he said. He stepped away from me, inspected my feet, then stepped back in to grip some more. "Do you have what you need?" said the headmaster. "The pants will have to be large in the waist, so they will look baggy around the legs," said the small man. "There's nothing I can do about it. I have too much to do to take on customized work for every fattened orphan sent your way." "I don't mind if they're baggy around the legs," I said. "Depending on how baggy they are," said the headmaster, "it will be fine." "I don't know how baggy they will be just yet," said the small man. He had drawn a notepad from his back pocket and he was sketching something. "I don't mind if they're baggy," I said again, and brought down my arms. The small man stepped forward and raised my arms once more. "If they're too baggy," said the headmaster, still pulsing the crumpled paper, "we will send them back." "You have to understand that they are going to be baggy," said the small man, lowering his notepad. "If you don't understand that, there's going to be trouble." "It's okay," I said. "I understand that the pants will be somewhat baggy," said the headmaster, "but if they are excessively baggy, we are going to send them back." "You're not getting it," said the small man. "The boy is fat. He needs a special waist. It's a grown man's waist. He does not have the legs of a grown man. The pants are going to be baggy and they will be too long. I've never seen an orphan so well fed." "Send the pants," said the headmaster. "Send pants that he can wear." The small man left in a huff, leaving the door ajar. "He's a pervert," said the headmaster. "Don't pay him any mind at all." So, a lot of terrible shit happens in this book. A lot of deaths, and the narrator has some trouble making friends. And so I'm going to read a quick scene. It's actually not quick at all. It's pretty long, so strap in. But this is right after the narrator and another boy named Nick have formed a somewhat begrudging alliance. Nick took my hand and pulled me from my coffin. We traveled together through the dark hallway and out to the exit. A dim light filled the entrance of our dormitory as the door opened, and rain found its way immediately to the floor. We dashed hand in hand through muddy grass and to the gazebo, which we could see clearly articulated against the blue backdrop of our stormy sky. Ripples of thunder were as constant as the ocean's waves, and lightning lit the scene like a wind-torn fire. It was elemental, is what I'm trying to say, like we were witnessing the Earth's creation. I felt a burst of energy, a charge that could be harnessed and used to bring down our enemies. "Take it all in," I told Nick. "Soak it up." He was catching his breath and watching the dormitory door to see if we'd been followed. It didn't move at first, but then it startled. I twitched at the sight, but nothing came. We left it open, and the wind was getting around it. Above us, the gazebo roof screamed with rain. "Nick," I said, "are you listening to me?" "The door," he said. "Forget it," I said. "From here, we can see everything coming. Nothing can surprise us, and this is where we'll stay." "For how long?" he said. Lightning throttled the darkness. "Until we both understand what we have to do next," I said. "The important thing is to be calm and patient. We are not beetles." "Okay," he said. "I know that." Above us, the wasps weren't moving. I could see their frozen back ends jutting out of the nests along the corners of the gazebo's roof. Were wasps frightened of thunder, I wondered? I mean, how could they not be? What would thunder be like to something so small and sensitive? Then again, it was hard to imagine they were capable of feeling fear at all. They were wasps. I couldn't get my head around it in the moment. I wanted to understand them, but it was beyond me. "Nick," I said, "do you believe it's possible for two living things to ever reach a place of mutual understanding?" "You said you have a plan," said Nick. "Of course I have a plan, Nick," I said. "I've gotten us this far, haven't I?" "And where are we exactly?" said Nick. "We're in a safe place," I said, "alive and well." "I was alive and well before our alliance," he said. "Everyone here is alive and well for now, and without even trying, without getting themselves stuck out in a storm. The roads are covered in mud. The valley is filling with water. There's no way in and there's no way out. At least I had a bed before. So far, I've only lost comforts and gained nothing more by joining up with you." It was time to put all my cards on the table. Time to tell Nick everything I knew, and to break the claw of ignorance that held him in its grasp. "You mentioned a ghost before," I said. Nick squinted. "Tell me everything you know about it," I said. "I only know what I was told," said Nick, "and what I suspect." "Tell me what you were told," I said. "Tell me your plan," he said. "Why are you so hesitant to tell me what you know?" I said. "Because I'm getting nervous," he said. "I'm cold, and I'm frightened." "You should be nervous," I said. "You should be frightened. But you have to trust me, Nick, or this alliance is going to fall apart." I could see in his face that he knew it was true. There was a sadness there which I recognized as the deep existential turmoil of a child who has realized how little control he has over his own life, and that the mature thing to do is not to face every challenge alone, but to put his trust in another. It was understandable for a boy whose early development had been frustrated by years spent almost exclusively on the dishwashing line that he would want to finally take charge in this moment of chaos and freefall. But our survival depended on him curbing his impulse to lead and accepting his lesser, though no less honorable, fate as my partner. "My parents died in a fire," he said. "How sad," I said, glancing at the frozen back ends of the wasps. It was possible, I realized, that they were all dead. The temperature had dropped considerably when the storm settled on us, and it was reasonable to assume the sudden drop would shock their little systems. Maybe they'd seen it coming. Maybe they'd all gathered in their nests together for those final moments. I'd always imagined wasps were the evilest insects in the insect world. They were manipulators, liars, imposters. But imagining them all gathered together in the wind of the oncoming storm, their bodies swelling the edges of the sockets of their shared home, I felt a sudden respect for them. I felt immensely sad for what had become of them and moved by their solidarity, their unity, in the most difficult of times, at least for a wasp. The boys in the facility would likely never have this level of devotion to one another. We had been at each other's throat from the day of my arrival, and if I'd had a plan, as I was sure I soon would, they wouldn't follow my lead. Even for Nick, who may very well have had the best of intentions, it was a struggle, and all were doomed because of it. The dormitory door slammed against its frame but did not shut. After that, said Nick, I was an orphan, charged to the state. They kept me in a large facility filled with other orphan boys. Like this place, I said, watching the door, and then the wasps. No, he said, this place is heaven compared. The other facility was much taller, but it had no outside areas in which we could play. There were hundreds of boys housed there, and nearly all of them were sick, coughing up their sleeves, vomiting into buckets. It was horrid. I came down with what they kept calling a terminal case. At first I was coughing black bile into the buckets, then it was blood. 2 men brought me into a room and discussed my condition. They decided that if it was indeed terminal, they would get rid of me before I passed on. They wouldn't be stuck with the bill for funeral arrangements or transporting the body. They wouldn't be stuck with the paperwork and the stigma of having lost yet another boy. I would need to be transported, they agreed, to another facility, a smaller facility that could provide the kind of attention I would surely need as my condition worsened. Somewhere outside of town, where I could see the hills and the sunsets and the lakes and maybe live out my few final months in peace. They were not talking to me. They were making a plan for me. I was loaded into a cart and brought here. You don't seem sick, I said. That's the thing, said Nick. I got better. Thunderstruck. I can't explain it. I was here for several weeks feeling miserable and vomiting up blood as I'd always been, and then one morning I woke up with a clear head. My lungs were sore, but I wasn't forced over to the bucket, not even once. I attended class. I attended class. I even began to play with the other boys. My life felt entirely different, and I haven't had so much as a cold since. What is the point of all this? I said. When my parents died, he said, my outlook on the world changed. You began to see it all as a maelstrom of life and death, a vast chaotic harmony in which the turning of a leaf carries no more significance than that of a human life, I said. No, said Nick. I decided to believe in ghosts. You decided? There's no knowing either way, correct? Unless you've seen a ghost, I agreed. Okay, he said. So I began waiting to see a ghost. I started expecting to see ghosts. It became clear to me that there are only 2 ways of living, assuming there is no such thing as ghosts or anticipating the possibility of seeing a ghost. That is, including the possibility of seeing ghosts in the way you think about the future. With 2 parents in the ground, I decided that the latter was preferable. Why pretend to know what I was sure I didn't? Why assume anything? So I waited for them. I opened myself up to the possibility of ghosts, and as soon as I'd done that, things changed in very unexpected ways. I examined the floor of the gazebo for a small rock or a bit of wood. I began to see things, he said, hear things. Such as, I said, voices, he said, shapes and figures. Here at the facility, I said, everywhere, he said. He narrowed his eyelids. But what of the ghost here at the facility, I said. I was growing impatient with Nick and increasingly curious about the wasps, which were still not moving. I wanted to determine once and for all if they were as achingly beautiful as they seemed, and the only way of doing that was to disrupt their corpses, to knock them down with something and see what became of them. Would they empty hollowly from their sockets, or would they swarm? What is known, said Nick, is that the facility is haunted. Every year, I've been told the ghost sends 5 of us to hell in its place so that it can remain among the living. I've never seen the ghost, but I have felt its presence. Other boys claim to have seen the ghost, but it's been difficult to verify those claims. Last year, most believed we dealt with it, but I've still felt it. Perhaps you have too. What makes the claims difficult to verify? I said. They don't line up, he said. Each describes the ghost differently. Sometimes the ghost is young, a boy like any of us. Other times the ghost is an old man or an old woman in a green shawl. It depends on who's saying what on which day, or how the mystery manifests itself. It's very hard to come to an understanding of the dead based on details gathered exclusively by the living. He looked to the ground. He seemed to hold his breath for a moment. The accusations do get out of hand, he said, and it is frightening when it happens. Perhaps there are multiple ghosts, I said. It's possible, said Nick. I won't argue with it. You know very little, Nick, I said. There is very little of which I can be confidently certain, he said. Nick, I said, empty your pockets. What for, he said. for the plan, I said. He turned his pockets inside out, emptying thread and an eraser onto the floor of the gazebo. I lifted the eraser. How will it help? Said Nick. I weighed it in my hand. You don't have anything else? I said. He shook his head. Is that all there is to know about the ghost? I said. You're sure? Not exactly, he said. What else is there? There's our theory. Which is? I was now furious with Nick for the way he was measuring out our time. Just tell me all the information, Nick. It's not information exactly, he said. Only thoughts. I'm not going to ask again, I said. Some of us believe that the other boys are lying about having seen the ghost, while others think they are simply confused or have been provoked to reckless speculation by the unverified accounts. We are even more skeptical of one another than usual because each maintains his own experience to be closest to the truth, drawing discrepancies into a harsh light. We've all witnessed something out of the ordinary at one point or another, but it is difficult to distinguish between the elements that truly comprise our shared experience here and the extra real moments we experience only as individuals. Whereas the line between the world we share and the world that exists exclusively for each of us. It's difficult to believe anything anyone says. Add to that the fact that every strange detail can ultimately be explained away by someone else, often in more ways than one, and the truth behind each account feels so far out of reach that we are perpetually in a situation where everything known has been described and yet nothing has been resolved. I thought of the laughter outside my window then, and the absence of any determinable source. I thought of Klott, Radek, and Clausen, and how quickly they'd vanished. Then the hands on my face, the hands I'd felt wrapped around me. It was true that if I presented my story as I'd experienced it, it would be a hard sell. But I was different from the other boys as Nick described them. I could admit I was without some critical information, and that my experience only accounted for a portion of the truth. Though my experiences might resonate with those who believed they were being haunted, I would never contend, based on what I'd been through, that I was being haunted, and though my story might have seemed unbelievable at times, I knew I wasn't making things up. I was not prone to flights of fancy. There were explanations available if we were willing to pursue them. Gaps or no, I could see most of the world for what it was. I could see people as they were, and I knew what they were capable of. When you say the other boys were dragged back to hell, I said, what do you mean exactly? I mean they disappear, he said. Sent away, I said. Graduated. Buried. I could fill a book with more reasonable explanations than his. Maybe, said Nick. We've never heard for certain either way. It's a long leap from there to ghosts, I said. For some, said Nick. What a few of us have come to believe, said Nick, what we can agree on, based on all the contradictory accounts and missing details, is that the ghost walks among us. Oh, I said. What makes the most sense, he said, based on all that we know, is that one of the boys in our cohort is not a boy at all, but a spirit haunting this hall. An interesting thought, there's no doubt, I said, but if you could pick a place to haunt for eternity, would you really choose this place? Maybe you can't pick, he said. Maybe not, I said. Can I tell you a secret, he said. I nodded, curling my hand around the eraser to make a fist. For the longest time, I thought it was me. You seem very much alive, I said. But you didn't know me before, he said. You only met me this way. I was a mess before, and then suddenly so much better. It was like I'd passed through some screen and into an entirely different life altogether. Death, maybe. Or so went the story I proposed to myself every night before bed. But not anymore, I said. Now you have a theory. We were circling one another. The lightning would flash every so often, revealing how pale he'd become, how sick he was with fear. You know, I said, I'm not yet convinced you're entirely well, Nick. Maybe not, he said, but I believe in the importance of staying open to possibilities that exist outside the realm of reason, though it more often than not results in our believing exclusively in what we hope for ourselves. For that reason, I also believe in the need to thoroughly and honestly examine one's beliefs and the true nature of oneself. Our eyes locked. As a result, he said, I can confidently declare that I am not our facility's ghost. I have checked my veins for blood, and I have found it. He held up his wrists, which were plaid with scars. Bully for you, I said. We no longer circled. We watched one another, frozen in our positions. Do you know whose veins I haven't checked? He said. I hurled the eraser at the wasp's nest then, beneath which our circling had positioned my new adversary. Either by luck or my natural athleticism, the nest received the full blow from the eraser, snapping its fragile stem and sending it down from its protected corner to the wooden floor of the gazebo where it split. Nick grinned when nothing happened. Then the wasps came twitching out and swirling up around him like a dust storm. Darting into the rain, I heard him howl as they began to sting. Stop there. Am I just like beet red right now? My face feels like it's on fire.
No. It's an illusion. It's a very light solution.
It's the light of this book cover. It's just like,
Yeah, that's
really
true.
Questions or comments for Colin? Colin, oh.
Paul's got one.
Do you have a, does the wasp have a central place in your soul? Because sometimes it works out that way and sometimes it doesn't. So what does the wasp mean to you? They appear
It's a swarm of them.
many.
Well, I mean, they mean a few different things, right? So it's like they sort of came into the book as a result of a very. Should I just like stand up at the thing? So they came into the book as like through like a really practical kind of way, where so the facility is this kind of dreamscape in a lot of ways. But I didn't want to lose the feeling that it was a concrete place that you couldn't necessarily imagine in full. But I didn't want the effect of it feeling concrete to go away or to not be there for the reader. So I based it off of a very specific thing. I based it off of the memory of my middle school campus in Texas. And so I drew a little map, and I was picturing those buildings and that gazebo and that lake and all those things as I was writing the book. And one thing about my middle school is that it was just covered in like hornets' nests and wasp nests and mud dauber nests, and so they literally, I feel like they have a place in my soul in the sense that like I have this very intense fear and sense of this like active threat at all times in like the corners of safe places, and that was the wasp when I was in middle school. But then so it's like I had this narrator go into the gazebo the first time and sort of looking around and describing it. And of course, when he looks up, there's going to be a wasp nest in there because in the gazebo of my childhood, there was a wasp nest there. And then I started thinking, well, what would this narrator do with that? And he would turn it into a sort of flawed metaphor for his situation because he is desperately trying to make sense of what's going on around him and developing these sort of aggressively, rational approaches or systems of thought around what's happening. And so when he saw that, it was like an opportunity to break from that and give him this moment where he could come up with this metaphor based on like really limited information. He's just like, there's wasps there, and I don't even know if they're alive or dead, and I'm going to use that to help me understand my situation. And that seemed like totally in line with the themes of the book, so I kept it. Yeah.
Wasps have a bad press.
Yeah, they really do.
Bees, they do wonderful things for the environment. Mm-hmm. Wasps just hassle you.
It's true. And yeah, I mean, bees are pollinators, and they have that delicious honey. Also, a bee, when it stings you, it dies. It gives its life. I'm like, yeah, like that's honor. I'm like, yeah, you could sting me. If it was worth your life to sting me, sting away, man. Like, the wasp just stings the shit out of you, flies back up.
Well, it stings you again.
Stings your friends. Just does whatever it wants. Yeah. Hate wasps. Also not a scientist, and I'm sure they do very good things for the world.
Thanks so much for being here. I have like a gazillion questions for you, but I've narrowed it down to 2, I think. I want to talk about the supernatural element in your books a little bit, where that comes from, what it means to you, why you use them, and also about your length, because it seems like most writers write really long novels, but you seem to have a really great skill at writing the economical short novel, and I just want to know why that length works for you, or how you feel about that.
So I had this teacher in grad school named Janet DeSaunier, and she at one point she was talking about how she was writing in fragments, and she was just like, I'm writing fragments because I'm writing the only things that matter, and all the other shit that would get you from here to there, just like scrap it, because I'm dying. Like, we're all dying. Like, so like, why would I waste your time and my time getting us there? I was like, oh, it's kind of beautiful, yeah. And like, you read all of these people, these different people talking about, finding the most necessary details, the most like the only including the important information. And it feels like a lot more people say they do that than actually do that. And so yeah, I mean, it just made sense to me to never write with a particular length in mind, to always just write the story until it felt like it was done, and then say, is there anything missing? How can do I need to add stuff? But to never feel like, oh, in order for this to be an important novel, it has to be 500 pages, because it has to like fuck up someone's back while they're reading it, while they carry it in their backpack, or like they won't remember me, I think this story, by the time I got to the end, it was like, there's literally nothing left. I mean, the situation at the end is pretty final. Yeah. No spoilers. So, yeah. And also, I mean, like, I like working on a lot of stuff, so I feel like it's just, like writing short, like, lends itself to that mode of production or something.
Oh, yeah. And the supernatural?
I mean, it's kind of different in each book, I think. Although it does keep recurring. In Hate's Day, there was a piece of, I mean, the supernatural was there, or the idea of ghosts, or the idea of the sort of unexplainable realm existing around these characters, was partly there because it's a story about the past catching up with you, about violent cycles, and that kind of thing. So it was like, there has to be something going on that's kind of recurring, or that's lingering no matter where they go, because they're always on the run. And then the job of the wasp, I think something that I think about a lot, and is definitely a big part of this book, is the unknowable and the limited tools that we have to sort of make sense of the things that surround us and that we are sort of participating in. And so it made sense to me to have it be this potentially supernatural story, because there had to be something that, that not only the narrator couldn't know about himself, but couldn't know about the people around him, and that like everyone was sort of actively trying to figure out, if that makes sense, in a way that like was ultimately beyond their ability to figure out. I was trying to think of something that was just like, there's a kind of line. You're on this side of the line, you're on that side of the line, and that's the thing he says in that passage, where it's like, it's very hard to come to an understanding of the dead based on details gathered exclusively by the living. And I was like, yeah, that's right. Which is, I think, and for me, it's certainly like, it goes beyond, or it's maybe not beyond, but like, what's the opposite of beyond? Further in, like, or on a smaller scale. Or it's like something that like my wife and I always talk about is like, it's mostly directed at me, but like my complete inability to understand, her life, or what it's like to be a woman in America, and that's just something that like we have to accept as a term of like occupying the same space together. That like we are going to be two people who will never be able to see the world as the other one sees it, but that doesn't mean that we don't have like a meaningful connection. It just, in fact, in some ways it's more meaningful because we can get glimpses of this aspect of living that we don't otherwise have access to. Yeah. Does that answer your question at all? Okay. I was trying to look for a way to bring up my wife because like I miss her a lot. I've been on the road for like a month, and it's just really fucking great.
So there's a strong tradition in Latin American literature of writing about the supernatural. In this country, people are nervous about that, I think, and so there's not a lot written in literary fiction, at least. You may have met my wife here this afternoon, Mary. She couldn't be here. I wanted to make sure I bought your book. But the reason I bring that up is she's very intuitive. And do you have, and maybe this is too personal, do you have a super intuitive sense that makes this supernatural that you write about more real for you than the average reader?
Like, am I like a medium?
Are you more intuitive than others?
Did others? No. I'm an idiot, man. I don't know anything. Yeah. I mean, if you read this book, it's about someone desperately trying to understand the most basic things around them. So, like, that's my life. Like, there's no, might feel like I have some intuition, but it's generally pretty flawed.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I don't think I have necessarily any kind of unique insight.
So what causes you to explore things that are out of the ordinary and that people who have a super intuitive sense may experience?
I don't know. You know, I mean, maybe for me, it's something it's like, I guess it's the product of not feeling like I have an intuitive sense and sort of diving toward those things that feel the most unknowable or the least like that there's the least sort of prepared explanation
so
for.
You can try to understand maybe.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
All right, that's fair.
And I do think that is for me like one of the sort of beautiful parts about being alive is what a human mind does with that giant void, you know, where they don't know what's in there, and so they're able to come up with such incredible things to imagine are there. And imagination is like a huge, for me, important thing. Yeah, that's in my soul as well, that belief in the imagination. And now I just feel like I'm like about to break into like a Disney song. Yeah, I said imagination way too many times just now.
Yeah, I just really like appreciated your first person narrator like a lot, and I was just wondering like how old is exactly he's supposed to be?
The best way of answering that question is by reading.
Okay. Yeah, but I was also just kind of wondering like your process of like writing like through that voice, because it sets the scene very well, but it doesn't lose like his personality at all.
Yeah. I mean, the voice, like his character is so clear to me, and his voice was one of the first things that I encountered from the book. And a huge part of writing the book was trying to figure out how to have this voice, and in this sort of unknowable situation with this child who's got this voice, and to figure out a way to make that meaningful while leaving it unknowable to some degree, you know, unless you purchase and read the book. Yeah.
The first page immediately put me in mind of Dickens.
Okay.
Because you're talking about the headmaster, and the headmaster says pretty awful things to this guy who's just trying to fit in. And he says, this is not a school, it is a temporary holding facility with mandatory educational elements. You will be held until you are far enough along to care for yourself. I just love that. This is reminds me a little bit about the way Sheila Heti uses 19th century prose. And so you start off thinking that this is going to be a very, it's almost a satirical, this is false Dickens. And as you go farther in it, it becomes less and less false and less Dickens. And it's one of the things that, and you use my favorite horrible English language word, which is facility. We have built a facility. That's not what facility means. And you use it a lot, and I'm sure you might have argued with your editor about it, you know. What is this facility stuff?
No, that's one of those times that's one of the words we did not argue about.
Okay.
Yeah. Pervert and murder were definitely, there was a lot of back and forth on those too. But facility was, yeah, I mean, that's one of the ones where, I mean, I loved it because it's like it's like something that, someone who wants to create a sense of some kind of special and effective environment would use, you know, while also kind of completely alienating the person who's supposed to be, you know, like getting something from it. Yeah.
Welcome to our facility.
Right. Yeah.
In facility.
So Colin, your intensity and physical involvement in your reading of the text just made me feel like you wrote this novel overnight, just in this intense. But could you talk about the actual nuts and bolts process of getting this novel made, and you know, how long it took you? What did it start as a novel? Was it a short story first? You know, those sorts of concerns.
Totally, yeah. So it started as a novel. I mean, I guess it started with the intention of it being a novel. And I wrote the opening scene, and I had this sort of boy's voice, and I had this moment. I had like been reading Robert Walser, and I was reading Jakob von Gutten, and I wanted to do something that was engaging with that. So it's very much like a nod toward the opening scene of that book, which is a similar like sort of confrontation. Jakob von Gutten. I don't speak German, so I think, but yes, I think it's Jakob von Gutten or Jacob van Gunten, is what we would say in Texas. That's the title. Robert Walser is the author. It's a great book. You should totally read it. And so it started with that, and then I have this kind of, you know, I had written a couple books beforehand that were this like sort of encyclopedic approach to a certain kind of idea. So it was like there's an abecedarian that's different animals. Like each story is centered around a different animal, and each story is written in a different style, and they're all kind of circling this idea. And there's another novella that's told in a series of short stories about two characters who are cast as a different sort of object or person within the opening sentence. So in one story they're an olive, and in one story they're Shel Silverstein, and this kind of thing. And I started feeling that kind of impulse because it was a familiar one that I had like done in a way that I felt excited about in the past. And so when I had that first scene, I was like, okay, so what will happen is this narrator will be at the school, and there'll be these hallways, you know, with all these doors, and every door he opens and goes into, he's suddenly in a different, like, boys' adventure story. So I started reading all these boys' adventure stories, and I was like, all right, I'm going to write this novel. It's just all of these adventure stories, and he just goes in and he kind of lives through the whole novel, and then comes back out and has to do it again. So I tried to write that, and I spent a year and a half writing that, and it was just so bad. It was just like pure garbage. It was you know, it was like 400 pages or something, and I had like 2 friends read it, and they were just really nice about being like, yeah, you gotta try again, you know. And so I, you know, it's this moment of desperation when I was editing, where sometimes when I'm just like really banging my head against something, I'll just go back through old files and look for anything that has a little bit of life. And I had since, in the process of writing that, jettisoned the opening scene of this book, because like, this doesn't make any sense at all. I have to like totally refigure the way this starts. And I read it, and it just became extremely clear to me that it wasn't about someone who could kind of go anywhere. It was about someone who couldn't go anywhere and was trapped in a specific place. And that was part of what made the voice start to feel meaningful to me. And that's when we started getting somewhere. And then once that happened, and I felt like I was seeing it faster than I could write it, so I was just, you know, I sat down at the desk, writing, I was writing like 10 hours a day, like never, and I didn't want to sleep, because I was worried that if I fell asleep I would lose sight of it, you know? So I wasn't getting enough water, I was like getting these like really screaming headaches, and so I got like this measuring cup. It was like a pitcher, it had like ounces measured out on it. Like a double-sized one, and I just would fill that with water in the morning and have that there at the desk so that I knew I was getting at least enough water through the day. And I was writing, and you know, it came out really close to the way it is now. And then I sent it out, and Soft Skull picked it up, and Yuka and I, my editor Yuka Igarashi and I worked on it for like, you know, I want to say like 6 to 8 months, maybe close to a year before we were finally done, and just like really tweaking it. But the big thing was like we were just like, everything is there. We just want to make sure that it's every moment is as like effective as possible versus going in and writing all this stuff. I was like, great, because I just rewrote this from like this other failed novel. Yeah, and so then from there we just put it out.
Wow, that's fascinating. And so there was kind of an overnight thing with a year and a half of hell before it, and then
Yeah.
a year of hard work after it.
I mean, it was like I just had to exercise this wild hair, and I think part of that is, I mean, from project to project, it's so easy to kind of slip into sort of pathways that you created for yourself, like, you know, solutions that you had for problems beforehand, because you're like, oh, I see it, it makes sense. It makes sense if I do it this way because I did it before and it worked. And I don't want to do that, you know. And I feel like it becomes, the life gets sort of drained out of it when you start walking the same roads or whatever.